Hello and welcome to the new episode of Access Up Space Defense and Security podcast. And this is possibly the final episode of December 2024, and then we'll be entering into the completely new year with the new kind of themes, new industry trends, and looking at kind of flourishment that is happening. I can expect that there are kind of new innovations that will be coming in, and we'll be starting with a kind of a new season of the podcast next year. But prior to that, as we see that this new industry trends, the new market research innovation aspects are not spotted easily in by sitting at just one place. You need to go to the conferences, you need to attend the trade shows, you need to attend the workshops. So this episode that we are doing, which is the final episode of December 2024, is primarily to give you an outlook on how the industry events basically are important not only to the sponsors but also to the attendees, how it can be strategized. Like, even if you are from outside of the industry or someone working in the industry, I don't think so a lot of people have the knowledge to strategize it in the way it should be, where it can give you a full potential or a full output in terms of return on investment. So, without any delay, I would like to take a jump into the topic directly. But prior to that, I'd like to welcome today's guest, who needs no introduction for the industry people. But as we have the people from outside of the space industry as well listening to this podcast, so I'd like to welcome Mr. Remco Timmermans. Hi, Remco. Welcome to
Hey,
the
Omkar, thank
podcast
you very
again.
much for having me.
Absolutely. It's always great to have you. We recently recorded a few bits at Space Tech Expo Europe, and connecting again with you right from the event and the topic of how the strategizing the event is more important. I think that's something I would say a bit of a continuity of the conversation that we are having after a
Yep.
month almost. So yeah, taking a jump into the topic directly, because the place where you interviewed me at the Space Tech Expo, it was a part of your one of your own media venture, I would say, Space Agenda. And it is very interesting to see because Space Agenda, I personally have been, I told in that interview as well, where it took, like, I personally have been following Space Agenda very well because it helps me to kind of have everything all at one place. Like, I don't have to go to find Australia's events on Australian government's calendar, or I don't have to go to the United States government website to find the government events. On Space Agenda, I find everything all at one place, and I've been following it for quite a long. I know about your venture, but I think it would be great if you can let our audience let know as well about this, and how can they find this events and their website, because I believe there are a lot of, apart from the space industry, there are a lot of people from outside of the space industry who are trying to establish themselves or trying to make an entry. I think it is very important for them when it comes to attending the conferences, the kind of conferences they can attend. So I think Space Agenda will be definitely an helpful tool for them. So from your perspective, can you tell us bit a story about Space Agenda, how it basically started and what came in your mind and what struck you to basically come up with this
Sure.
idea?
Well, Space Agenda, the idea is very old. In fact, Space Agenda started in 2009 by people with the same questions that we have. I was not involved back then, but people looking for a single place to go to find everything that's going on in the world of space industry events, to plan your own calendar for the quarter, for the year, for the conference season, and that did not exist. So a few people from the International Space University, they jumped into that gap and they started building a database and they started collecting things. And that ran for a few years, but it was very much dependent, and it is still very much dependent on inputs from the audience, from the industry itself. And to cut a long story short, the website ran for quite a while. It slowly grew in attendance, but it wasn't until this year, until July, August 2024. I can still say this year, we're not in 2025 yet. Um, but earlier this year, we relaunched the website, and we put a lot more effort into not depending on the audience themselves to provide us with the events, but to really put a team of people in place to search the event for you. So what we now have is a database that is much more accurate, much more complete. It is hand selected, if you like. So you'll find the events that are relevant for you as a space industry professional or an astronomy science, and we can talk about the scope of Space Agenda later, but we try to collect all events that are relevant to a space professional to do her or his business. And that is in a nutshell what we did. We relaunched the website in August. The look and feel is completely different, and we are now running it as a business rather than um, just a list run by volunteers. It's gone professional, if you like.
Interesting. I personally love the new interface of the website, especially where you can actually spot the dates, months, year as well. It kind of the filtering makes it very easy, because I think the previous website was a list down, the old ones
Yeah.
that you had, and the new ones that I think that it makes a job lot easier, I would say. And I'm pretty sure, like, a lot of traction is definitely going to
Well,
come for
hopefully,
you
and
guys.
and that's the idea, to make it easy for people to find the events that are
Yes,
relevant for you. You can find events, as you say, in a particular time frame, in a particular geography. So you can search by
yes,
country, you can search for the types of events. We have all sorts of different events. Of course, conferences are the mainstay of spaceagenda.com, but we also have short training courses. We don't list all university courses because we all know they start in September and they end in July, but short courses, professional training opportunities are there. Workshops are there, meetings are there, public events in certain cases, if they're of interest to the space industry, are there. So lots of different types of events on lots of different topics, and that's the other thing that you can look for, because of course the space industry. How do you define space? And that is something that we're struggling with. I'm also a market researcher. What defines the space market? And we see the report from Bryce and from Nova Space coming in every year. And
yes.
it's difficult to see where space ends and something else starts. And we're struggling with that as well, but we try to define those boundaries for you. So the idea is that you shouldn't have to miss an event, because one of the most frustrating things, at least in my life as a space professional, is going out to LinkedIn or to social media and seeing everybody talk about this great event that I am finding out through that post on LinkedIn, finding out that the event happened yesterday. That is super frustrating. I want to avoid that.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with this fact, because this has happened with me as well. I still remember there was New Space Europe conference in Luxembourg, the first edition, and I think I was at the university studying at that time in 2017. It was the first edition. I think in November it happened at International Space Institute I was studying. So a bunch of people, half of the people from university went directly just for a visit, and they got the access, because it was the first, and coming from International Space Institute, you get the kind of networking access and all. But half of us thought that it's possibly in the next week, and we missed the
Yeah.
event. So I mean, this is a live example. You can basically miss out on the events. But yeah, thanks for wonderful insights on the first part of what is Space Agenda. I'll be also adding the link in the description section of the podcast once we finish the
Thank you.
complete conversation. So yeah, moving ahead into the conversation, because we are now just a week, almost a week away, I would say, from 2024 ending and entering into the new year. So from your perspective, because you have been one of the prime, I mean, industry experts attending the conferences, live shows, even the trade shows, workshops as well, because we see some of your workshop videos as well from Estonia, I think we had seen. So from your perspective, how many global events can you expect in 2025? And are there any new additions also from your side? Because I believe there are some trademark events like Space Tech Expo, then there is Sat Show, then there is, I think, Asia Pacific APSCC conference, I think, which happens in South Korea. So there are like several of the benchmark conferences, but apart from that, also do you expect any new conferences which are coming up, and how many different event you are
Yeah,
expecting
right
in
now, what
2025?
we expect or what we see in the industry, and again, it completely depends on how you define a space event, um, because there can be hundreds of thousands. but the way we define it at the moment, we have 300 upcoming events in the calendar. That is mostly for 2025 and a few already into 2026. But there's 300 events, and these are what you call these mainstream events. So where you mentioned 5, there's actually about 300 of them. And then there is a whole bunch, probably about 1,000 more, of much smaller events, like regional events that are announced much shorter in advance. So the big events, they're usually announced 1, sometimes even 2 years in advance. But all the big ones tend to be announced 3 months, 4 months in advance. And we try to keep track of everything. So right now we have 300 upcoming events, again, and those are mainly the big ones. So you can really go to events 24/7 in 2025 if you wanted to. We have events literally starting every day in 2025.
Interesting. That's quite interesting. No, 300 is, I mean, that's a huge, and I believe this might, you correct me if I'm wrong, this might keep on increasing because we see a lot of countries, emerging countries are, entering into the space industry. I think in the last few years we have seen Philippines, Thailand, even, the new space
Yeah,
domain, I
no,
think, kind of
absolutely, and
exploding into this.
those are some of the trends. So what we will see in 2025, what we've seen over the last years, is that in Space Agenda we typically carry between 1,000 and 2,000 events per year. And again, this depends a little bit on how you define an event, but some are really small scale. But once the local events are added, like 2-3 months in advance, and I expect another big batch to be announced in January, because that's when people start to fill their calendars, not just to visit, but also lots of space agencies do not list any events for 2025 at this point. So if you want to see the events,
Interesting.
really spaceagenda.com is the only one that is as complete in the industry that it is now. There's a few competing ones that are really good, but ours is by far the most complete and accurate. And we'll see as soon as these space agencies start to announce their events. For example, at the moment, the French Space Agency has 0 events in their calendar for 2025. That will probably change in a few weeks. And as soon as they add them, we will add them as well.
Interesting. Absolutely. And, taking a step further in the event side, as you mentioned, because, being a consultant, I mean, I'm a former journalist, but then, turned into kind of a more on the business consulting side. And having a mixed bag of both journalism and now as a business, I see conferences as more, something that kind of gives me or provides me nuggets on what the industry is thinking about, where the industry is going. So, from your perspective, can you tell us how events can help spot the industry trends and how it can basically help a wider range of
Absolutely.
audience?
So you've already mentioned a few of the things, but what we can see across all these different events that we carry in the calendar is an evolution of topics, an evolution of trends that we see in the industry at large. And if you follow the large consulting firms, you'll see those confirmed. But you see that reflected really in the events. Events is really a way where you can see these trends happening on Earth. No pun intended, but that's really where you can see what's really being done with these topics that are discussed at high level. We look at space sustainability, for example. That's been a topic at conferences for a long time, but we now see that topic at other events, at expos, at trade shows. We see that topic, lots of startups that jump into that gap, and lots of attention for space sustainability. We see things like in-space manufacturing, in-space servicing, things that we didn't see a few years ago. There's a lot, and you mentioned it, a lot of events now looking at globalization, at developing nations, at capacity building, as the United Nations calls it, in non-traditional spacefaring nations. And we see events popping up in those places. We saw GLEC in 2022 in Ecuador being one of the trendsetters there. We saw the Central American Space Conference now last September, the second edition already in Central America. We now see in February coming up the African and Middle East Space Conference about new space in Africa, and followed in April by another event in Egypt on that same topic. And we see similar things happening in South America, in Southeast Asia, in all these new places. And that's another trend. So it's the globalization, but it's also all these technical trends. So everything is kind of mixing up. But an interesting one was at Space Tech Expo, where you now have specific conference stages. There's not one conference, but there's now 4 conferences happening at Space Tech Expo. And one is about connectivity and satellite communication. That's an interesting one. Another one is on small satellites. Small satellites has been a trend over the last years. You now see lots of events coming up on the role of defense since the war in Ukraine. That's been a big eye opener. And also really the first stage where space plays such an important role. And now you see a massive, also under the influence of geopolitics, a massive increase in the number of events or defense events that were traditional defense events that now bring in the element of space. Meaning for SpaceAgenda, very concretely, that we now suddenly start adding all these defense events that were not on the calendar previously, just because they now all add these space elements. You see the same trend in air shows, where it was the 2 main air shows in the world, or maybe 3, Farnborough, Paris, and Berlin, ILA, that had a space pavilion. Now you also see local air shows, Dubai, Singapore, China. This year, Bali, the Indonesian National Air Show, will have a space element in it for the first time. So suddenly you see all these air shows becoming air and space shows. And there's a lot of information that you can take out of those particular trends that I think are of interest, and that make many more new events interesting for space professionals.
Interesting. And you mentioned about this industry trends, and personally, I still find it very difficult to kind of segment it. I mean, I know for my business needs what are there, I have to attend those kind of events. But when I see at the long term evolution of my business of maybe 10 years or 15 years, from that perspective, I sometimes find it hard which one to attend as a conference or an event, or even for that matter, even a workshop. If you are a person who is into the research or a student, so, from your perspective, how to strategize your event calendar in the
Yeah,
space
well,
industry?
there's a few ways, and we also have to look at the few different reasons why you attend a conference. If you're there as a visitor, just to learn and to network, then I'd say go to spaceagenda.com. I say that all the time, but I'm biased. Go to spaceagenda.com and look at what's happening close to where your customers are. So if your customers are primarily in Europe, look for the European event. If your customers are primarily in the US, look at the US events, etc. But also look at the segments. There are events specifically for the Earth observation market, for satellite communications, for defense, for supply chain, for manufacturing, for space exploration, for deep space, for science. So use spaceagenda.com, use the selection boxes to select on all those different things and see what pops up. There might be events in the calendar that you've never heard of that are still of interest because they're in your area, they're in your area of interest. And that is just if you want to be a participant, if you want to visit. Secondly, you can actively reach
Absolutely.
out to these events if you have specific expertise that you would like to share, either for commercial reasons or for academic, scientific reasons, and see if there are calls for speakers or for presenters. And that's often the case. And that gives you literally a podium to present on. And then the third way is to select which ones might be of interest to you as an exhibitor. Many events, more and more events now have an exhibition, an expo, exhibit, whatever you want to call it, where you can have, in the simplest form, tables. In the bigger form, you can have booths, and Some of them are really big, like the International Astronautical Congress tends to have one of the biggest expos. Space Tech Expo is a really big one. The different SAT shows that we have, the one in Washington, the one in Utah, they have big exhibitions, but also some of the smaller events have exhibits where, especially for startups, for example, for small companies, these smaller events often offer very cheap opportunities to have a booth. So instead of just visiting, have a booth, bring a few leaflets, make it look nice, bring your marketing expert, and use that as an extra opportunity to market. And again, you can use Space Agenda to find where these exhibits are. You can select for exhibits and find which events have exhibits, and then go to the website and see, well, which ones might be within your budget and within your target audience. And then obviously the fourth method is to go in as a sponsor. If you want maximum visibility, you can go in as a sponsor. And again, select the events that meet your target audience the best way your target audience is present, be it as exhibitors, be it as speakers, be it within the topic area that that is interesting for you as a business, within the geographical area. And well, Space Agenda facilitates all. And I know the event organizers are always very interested, for obvious reasons, in organizations sponsoring their event. And you can use Space Agenda for all these different uh, um, objectives.
Interesting. And I mean, we spoke about strategizing, and you gave an extensive outlook for each kind of segment or the kind of people who are trying to attend the conferences as a sponsor or even a visitor. So, from that perspective, now I would like to ask you personally, this question is for you. I mean, you can answer it the way you have planned it. So, how do you strategize your event calendar? Like, for example, for 2025, what are your plans and which all events you're attending and why are you
Yeah,
attending
so
those
I
events?
have my personal and business objectives as well, just like anyone. Of course, um, for Space Agenda, it's maybe very specific. I wouldn't say different because every company is different, but it's very specific because space events are our business. So our target audience are these 300 events. So we target the event organizers with support in their marketing campaign for the events. We tell the story of events as a service. We help event organizers find audience, find exhibitors, find sponsors. So we specifically target these organizers. And I'm also interested as a person and as a marketing consultant for stories, for trends, for things that I can use to help my other customers find out what's going on in the industry. So networking for me is important to build a network, not just within the events industry, but also in the space industry at large. So I know who's who. So networking for me is very important. And then obviously doing business. So I go to the events where I can do as many interviews as possible, where I can sell. I mean, this is a business thing, where I can sell as many interviews as possible. And that tends to be the trade shows where there's large exhibits. Those are my target events because there's lots of people I can talk to and who I can interview. Um, and then obviously I wear quite a few hats. So I am a member of the International Astronautical Federation. I'm a symposium chair myself for one of the symposia at ISC. So the ISC plus the spring meetings are a must go for me. Not so much to do my business, but to do my duty as an IEF volunteer to make sure that the Space Education Outreach Symposium at IEC this year in Sydney will be a success. So I will be in Paris in March. I will be in Sydney in September, October. I will be at Space Tech Expo because my clients are there. Um, and for the rest, I will be at the events where the organizers pay me to be there. I mean, I have to be opportunistic and say, if you want to use the services of spaceagenda.com or Space Agenda TV, which is our conference TV channel, then I'll be more than happy to attend your event.
Absolutely. I think the last part that you mentioned about the services, as I mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, I'll be adding your events link below the description of the episode, so that I'm pretty sure a lot of people who listen to this podcast would like to get in touch with you, because I mean, we spoke about the niche level conferences that are happening. Like, for example, in India, there used to be just general expo and conferences, but now there is a DevSat
We
that
have
has been
we,
happening,
we have.
which is
Let
the
me tell
second
you,
or
we
third
have
edition.
11 events
Yeah,
in India in 2025 in our
yeah,
calendar, and I'm sure there are at least
yes,
double that
yeah,
amount. But the 11 big ones are
yeah,
there. All the ones that you just mentioned are there.
yes. Absolutely, yeah. The DevSet one, I think I mentioned it because the niche industry level. So, I think apart from the general conferences, we are also moving
Yep.
towards a niche level. Like you can expect, like in Paris Air Show and all. Also they have the space companies exhibiting over there. So that is related to
Yep.
the aviation. Then in the maritime domain also there is Satcom and EO. So we can see, I think, in down the line more, I think, industry niche specific events as well, which will happen, because I believe it is very important. Like, for example, at Space Tech Expo, I met some of the uh, companies, like I won't mention their name, but some of the company people, and who are my good friends. From their perspective, it was not that helpful for them for the Space Tech Expo, because Space Tech Expo is meant for subsystem and the
Yep.
system level service providers, or the people who
It's a
sell the
supply chain
hardware
event. Yes.
primarily. Yes, it's a complete supply chain event, but not exactly for the people who are a satellite operator and
No.
would like to sell their imagery. It is not really meant for them. So, I mean, this kind of strategizing, that's the reason I think the strategizing point was very much important, because I think once you pay and come to the conference and get disappointed, I think there is no going
Yeah.
back. You have
No, and,
lost
and that's a very good
your
point. What you
possibly
mentioned there
investment.
is, and I mentioned this in the beginning, is where does space end and do other industries begin? And is that relevant? Because if we look at, and this goes both ways. So what we see, and these are trends, what we see is that there are more and more conferences that are not necessarily directly linked to space. Like the biggest one of the biggest events in Europe, full stop, the Mobile World Conference, Mobile World Conference, yeah, MWC, Barcelona in March this year, is over 100,000 attendees. It's massive compared to any of the major space events. But this is now on our list as a space event because this is an interesting one for the telecommunications industry. And the telecommunications industry is more and more
Absolutely.
being integrated into mobile communication, into all sorts of communication, and space is now becoming an element of that. That's an obvious one. So the Mobile World Congress is in our list, but there's also events like smart city events. There's a famous. It's coincidentally it's every year in Barcelona as well. There's an event on smart cities. Well, smart cities, you would think is something for urban planners and and for people who manage cities and municipalities. But there's now an element of space. So what we see,
Absolutely.
and this is interesting, especially USPA is very good at that. The European Union Office for the Space Program in Prague, they're very good at going out to events outside the space bubble to bring space into agriculture, into maritime, into aviation, into the cruise industry, into the urban industry, into energy, mining, all these different application areas that are not listed, not necessarily on Space Agenda. You will not find smart city events on Space Agenda, yet for the space industry, they might be of interest. So do think beyond just Space Agenda, because Space Agenda is very much within the space bubble. We're struggling a little bit with that. So Mobile World is there, but smart cities is not there. So that is kind of our challenge, but also the other way around for people working in smart cities. Well, do come to Earth observation events, for example, to remote sensing events. We have the Living Planet Symposium this year happening again, which is one of the biggest Earth observation events. It's every 3 years. I wish they did it more often because this is where you see that reflected. And these are events that are of interest to people from outside the space industry that work within agriculture, within cities, within energy, within automotive, autonomous driving, God knows all these different applications of space data that should come to things like Living Planet Symposium or even the International Astronautical Congress. So we need to play that awareness card both within and outside the industry, to make sure that space is integrated in all those different application areas. It's difficult for us in Space Agenda. What do we not include? Because before you know it, you include everything, and then it's no longer Space Agenda, but Everything Agenda, and we don't intend to do that. But it's definitely a trend, making life more difficult for us as much as for the space market analysts. Because what is the space market nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I completely agree with you on this point, especially the getting the people from outside of the space industry. I mean, that is what we have been doing with our marketplace as well, opening the segments into the other industry where people from the space industry can find business there, and those industries can basically look at the space sector to utilize or take applications or procure any kind of applications for their industrial usage. So I believe this is where I think we are finishing up with this conversation, but I think I would love to have an extended conversation with you once we enter at least a mid 2025, especially looking at the kind of events we had. It would be basically great to kind of do a recap on a quarterly basis of the
Hey,
events as well,
fine with me, of course.
on how yeah. Yes, yes, absolutely. So definitely, thank you very much, Remco, again for such wonderful insights. And I wish you all the best with Space Agenda, as well as with the kind of events that you're going to attend, and a very happy New Year in advance as
Likewise,
well.
you happy holidays, a happy new year, and I hope to run into you and, of
Yes,
course, all the viewers and listeners here at the next space event, which, of course, we've said it often enough, but I'll say it once more. You can find on spaceagenda.com.
absolutely. I'll be entering the link in the description below.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.